Welcome to the WellCast. Life is messy. We're here to help you sort it out.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of the WellCast. I'm Jordan Hogue. I'm joined by Mike Sarasoni. We are on video and audio.
Yes. That's our new norm. We don't have to tell them every time now.
Well, I don't know. I'm just excited about it.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
How you doing today, man?
Dude, I'm good. I feel like our family has been sick for since Christmas. And
Nice.
so that's like 3 months. And I really feel like it was exacerbated by this Mississippi trip that we're going to talk about because I got COVID on it.
You got COVID.
I got COVID and then came home, had to quarantine for my family.
Yikes.
And so anyway, we're healthy now.
Yeah.
All health, and except for I still have COVID. Just kidding.
Jeez.
Just kidding.
Slowly backs up.
Yeah. But yeah, we're healthy again and feeling good and excited to be recording this podcast with you.
That's awesome, man. I mean, and this podcast is all about sort of a trip and experience that you and some other people from our church had where you went to Mississippi.
Yeah, Jackson, Mississippi.
And studied with...
also Alabama.
And Alabama.
Yeah.
You studied with the Perkins Foundation.
Yeah.
John
John Perkins.
Yes.
He was he marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And had his own civil rights journey in Mendenhall, Mississippi, and so it was really good. He's a man of God, and so it was really cool to sit under his teaching.
I think what I like about this conversation.
He's 91 years old, by the way.
My gosh,
yeah,
only like a few years older than you.
Just we had the same amount of hair.
Yeah,
but so much wisdom to sit under his teaching, and I was just I was really inspired by some of the things he had to share with us.
Is that Dr. Perkins? Was it true that he taught himself to read through the Bible?
He did teach himself to read. So he was his mom actually died giving birth to him. And not giving birth, but she didn't have enough nutrition to feed him and to stay alive. And so through that whole process, he grew up pretty poor. Yeah. And he taught himself how to read. He still he jokes that he's not a good writer. He's written a ton of books, but he just kind of speaks them, and other people help him, put the pen to paper. But
that would be nice.
Yeah, but his wisdom just kind of overflows when you sit with him.
I mean, wealth of experience, but also just deep faith.
Yeah, I mean, and the amount of stuff that he's been through, I mean, we'll talk about in the podcast, or in the episode, but I mean, this guy was beat within an inch of his life.
I mean, he's probably forgotten more experience and time with God than we could imagine at this point in our life.
Some of the stuff that he says at 91, you're just like, that's gold.
Yeah.
I mean, he challenged me, and I think I talk about it in the episode, but he challenged me to love people as individuals. And that was just like, man, I think of people as groups all too often. Yeah. And it was just so good for him to remind us. And the other thing, man, that came out of this trip was I just saw how much the fight for justice in the 50s and 60s, it was a God thing. Like the natural human response to evil, like when you're being oppressed, is to fight back. Yeah. Right? I mean, if somebody steals your lunch in the lunchroom, like your natural, unless you're like way smaller than them, your natural response is to say, hey, give me back my lunch, and you fight them. Like, at least that was my experience. Yeah. And yet you see time and time again, when you're there on the ground in Mississippi or Alabama, stories of where the oppression was happening, and despite the fact that it shouldn't have been the case, they stayed peaceful. And it couldn't have worked any other way. Yeah. Like, if they would have gotten violent, then things would have just escalated, and it would have gotten worse instead of better.
Turned into a race war.
War, and they would have lost. Yeah. I mean, and because the population, they're outnumbered. Yeah. And so it was an honor to sit under his teaching. We got to spend 2 different times with him. And
I think what you guys will hear on this podcast is not that it's just a recounting of your trip. Yeah. But it's what God taught you guys through this experience that I think is broadly applicable to the lives of everyone.
Yeah, and I think the cool thing is it reshaped in a lot of ways our worldview because we went into it curious, and so I think that's a cool part of this trip is just going, man, I don't have any expectations. Yeah, I don't know what God's gonna do. Yeah, and it was not a disappointment.
Well, we think no matter where you're at right now, we just hope that you'd open your hearts to learning something here, and please subscribe if you like what you hear. Yeah, share it with a friend.
Share it with a friend. We want to be able to let other people enjoy some of the conversations conversations that we're having. And speaking of those, we have Mallory Mueller, who co-led the trip with me. And so let's jump into the episode with Mallory and me on our trip.
Hope you guys enjoy.
Of Mississippi. Yeah, enjoy.
All right. Well, we are joined here with Mallory. Welcome, Mallory.
Thank you. Thanks for having me,
Mallory
guys.
Mueller.
Mallory Mueller. Yes, you have a last name.
She does.
M&M. How you doing, Mallory?
Doing good.
Yeah?
Doing great.
Do you like M&Ms?
I do.
Okay.
Actually.
That's
Which
good.
version?
Only
Yeah.
the blue kind.
No,
What?
no.
Just-
Like peanut,
flavor.
peanut butter, not what color. They all taste the same.
What are you,
I
Led
know
Zeppelin?
it was a joke, Mike.
all right,
Come
that's
on.
funny.
Regular ones.
What?
Over
Classic.
all of them?
Just milk chocolate? You're a
Wait,
sociopath.
Okay. Well, what kind do you like?
Peanut butter.
Yeah,
Okay.
peanut butter's the best.
100%.
Can I tell
Aren't
you what's
those
not
just
the
Reese's
best?
Pieces then?
No.
They
No.
have a... Okay, so let's
They're-
get granular here.
Yeah.
They have a layer of chocolate around the peanut butter.
Yeah, way
and
better.
the peanut butter is like salted rather than sweet.
Yeah, it's way better. You know what's not good?
Interesting.
And they should pull, like, if you work for
I'm feeling
M&M's.
self-conscious about
If
how
you-
deeply I
If
explain
you,
that.
if you work for M&M's, I want you to listen to this.
Yeah, sponsor us first of all.
Yeah,
Would
first of
love-
all,
yeah,
sponsor
put
us as a podcast.
put right here.
But also, pull the caramel ones. They're not good. The caramel M&Ms.
never had 'em.
They're not good.
They're good.
Sounds good.
No, I don't like them.
Then don't eat them.
Oh, all right. So what you're getting at is it's a personal preference.
So welcome
is.
to the M&M
Yeah.
podcast,
yeah.
guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brought to you by M&M's.
Okay.
Yeah, and actually we have musical guest M&M. No, I was kidding.
So that's not our topic today.
No, our topic today
that would be a
is
lame topic.
an
as much as we love
experience that
M&Ms.
you two had
We did.
on what our church calls an exposure trip.
Yes.
Yes.
We
Right,
got
so you went to
exposed.
Mississippi, were exposed
multiple
in a lot of different
ways.
ways, and not in any of the weird ways. Of
No. Yeah, we got COVID.
Yes,
Yeah.
and but you guys had an experience together with a group of people,
We did.
and which was all built around biblical justice and the issue of racial reconciliation.
Yeah. Ethnic unity is maybe.
Call it whatever you want. Huh?
Well, it just becomes. I think ethnic unity becomes my preferred way to talk about it. I think
Okay.
I think we experienced a time with Dr. John Perkins, and he.
Yeah, if you don't know who that is,
Yeah, he's
look
a
his stuff up.
he's a civil rights
kind of a
leader. Marched with
juggernaut
Martin
in the
Luther
conversation,
King.
yeah.
I mean, he's incredible and an incredible man of faith.
Mm-hmm.
And he, much like Brad, if you've heard Brad talk about this, I think a lot of what Brad said has been shaped in some way by men like Dr. John Perkins. But he just reminded us that there's one race. And it's the human race, and within that race, there's a lot of different ethnicities, and heaven's going to be full of different ethnicities, and so we should be championing the effort to celebrate those differences. And it was a beautiful time. I really enjoyed it. Mallory helped lead the trip, and so we got to experience it with 8 of our new closest friends. We got a text thread; it keeps going.
Mallory, have you
Does.
been on the podcast before?
I haven't.
Wow.
Oh,
Okay, well,
first
tell us
time.
about yourself. Tell the people who's Mallory. What do you? Why do we know you? Who are you?
Oh, this is a deep question.
Yeah.
I'm Mallory. I am here on staff at the Well. Have been on staff for almost 9 years, and I currently am Connections Director for Midweek Campus and Fig Campus. Boop boop.
For all you figgies out there.
So, yep.
Whoop, whoop.
Love it. And yeah, I'm married. Been married for 8 years.
Nice.
Does your husband
And-
have a name?
He does. His name is Jeff,
No.
and he's a physical therapist.
He's a good dude.
And he's great. I
Yeah.
love him.
49ers fan.
Yeah, he's a 49ers fan.
Mhm. So
So, yeah.
So he's great, but there's one flaw.
godly. Yeah.
Got it.
Mm,
Yeah.
Debatable.
yeah, it's debatable.
Yeah. So, and you guys both went on this trip. I mean, tell us like sort of the baseline. What was the trip's desire, goal? What'd you do? You know.
Yeah, we got to hang out with Dr. John Perkins, but it really was this pilgrimage of seeing how his life has been shaped through his own experiences and just his own journey of injustice. And I went to a lot of museums and hung out with their family a lot to, learn about his life and what he's done in terms of bringing awareness or fighting for injustice, fighting against injustice, and
Yeah, it was a tour, so it wasn't.
It was largely educational.
Yeah, it was experiential. So experiential education, I guess, is a good way to say it. But it started in Jackson, Mississippi. So we left Fresno bright and early. I think we had a 6 a.m. flight, so those are fun. But we flew to Jackson, Mississippi, and from that was kind of our hub, and it's where he's from. Originally from Mendenhall, just about 30 minutes outside of Jackson. But now he and his family and his organization, they all are in Jackson, Mississippi, and so that was kind of our hub. And we all stayed in this house on their property together, and then from there, each day we kind of took different trips. So we went as far as Montgomery, Alabama. And so we got to experience things that were amazing. Like that was one of my favorite days because we literally sat in the church where Martin Luther King Jr. was the pastor. And you could almost just put yourself as much as possible, obviously, in the shoes of the people who were there. Like you were in the place where they were. And so we went to Selma, Alabama, and then all around the Jackson, Mississippi area, Mendenhall, and different things. And so it was a trip of a lifetime. It was hard, but it was also a great trip.
Well, tell me why you guys wanted to go on this trip.
I know for me, I am very new to the whole conversation of ethnic reconciliation, injustice. And so for me, it felt like a really good way to...
That wasn't like a table topic growing up for you? Or?
Definitely not.
No? Yeah.
Definitely not. And it's always been kind of intimidating for me to enter into that conversation. So this just felt like the Lord just saying, hey, this is a way that I want you to learn more about like, my heart for justice and to be able to process and experience things with people of color, right? Very different than going to a museum with just myself or someone who's never experienced injustice or racism and walking through that. And so it was that was how it was very impactful for me, was experiencing that with people who have experienced
So you
racism.
went with a desire for like education, knowing, because where'd you grow up?
Fresno, here. Yeah. I mean, hardly any diversity, and way far removed from all of that, right?
Okay.
Just nothing.
What would you say like the ethos around ethnic reconciliation or racism would be in your family growing up?
We love everyone, no matter their skin color.
Okay.
And
which is good. That's nice.
Which is totally great. It's a good start. It's a good start. However, if someone were to say that there was anything such as white privilege, that would be like, no, we aren't privileged because we're white. It's just because we've worked hard to get to where we're at, sort of thing. So
yeah, I think for me, I wanted to go on the trip because I wanted to quiet all the noise. Like I respect Dr. John Perkins because he's a man of faith, because he puts the cross at the center of the conversation. And to be honest, the conversation, like Brian King, who's been on our podcast before, he stretches me in so many different ways around this conversation because it's not really a conversation I like to enter into. Yeah. Like it's uncomfortable. It's full of traps, right? I mean, if we're honest, it's a hard conversation to have. But I think the traps get removed when everyone is asking the question, like, what does the Bible say about this? And so I really was attracted to this trip by the opportunity to sit down with a man of God who's lived it out and just go, what does the Bible say about this? Yeah. Like what does the Bible say about how two people from different ethnicities are supposed to relate to each other? And what does it look like for us to get there? And I had a lot of conversations on this trip that were eye-opening to me. Yeah. And have started to shape kind of my worldview at 38 years old that I never really thought about before.
Well, let's start with What does the Bible say about this?
Yeah. Go ahead, Mal.
Go for it, Pastor.
Well, I think
Theologian Mal? What do you think? Yeah.
Well, I think, as early as Genesis, we start to see this different ethnicity start to come about, right? And then even to a certain extent, we flesh that out all throughout Scripture. So I know, like, the minor prophets talk a lot about the Ninevites and Assyrians and Babylonians, and as long as we can have a written history of the world, we have ethnicities that are at war with other ethnicities. It's our sin nature that's put on display. And so we know that as long as it's left up to us, that we're going to be at war with other ethnicities. That's just the way it is. That's our sin nature. That's our human depravity. Outside of God, that's our destiny. We've seen it for thousands of years. And yet we see in the New Testament that Jesus came, and he came to unite both Jew and Gentile. And you have as recently as the Gospels, you have the people group called the Samaritans and the Jews at war with each other. They hated each other, and they even shared half blood. Like the Samaritans were half Jewish, half Gentile, and so we see even in Jesus's time that things haven't changed.
Yeah, and people don't even think about the Good Samaritan parable as being loaded with racial and ethnic undertones, right?
You can't read it without it. I mean, if you're actually doing justice to the account of the Good Samaritan, you can't read it without understanding that Jesus knew exactly the story he was telling. Yeah. He knew that he was poking at the Pharisees, going, "Look, I'm going to poke at your racial uncomfortabilities at the very least, and racism at what probably was the case." Yeah. So then we look at, let's fast forward, right? Jesus goes to the cross on our behalf, and then he says, go out to the ends of the earth, right? Take this message to the ends of the earth.
Acts 1:8.
Yeah, and then and so the gospel then goes out to all these different ethnic groups. Yeah. Well, what happens then, right? The Jews go, wait a minute.
Hey, this is our gospel.
Yeah.
We're the people of God.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't magically just go away.
Yeah.
But then you see people like Paul, right? Who have been transformed by the gospel, who was a persecutor of Christians and a Jew. Yeah. Who now he's the chief apostle to the Gentiles. And he even confronts Peter, right? Later on in Galatians, like he talks about confronting Peter about his racism.
Which is funny. I heard somebody say, like, not even a vision from God, like, happened in Acts 10, right? Where God shows Peter the gospel for everybody. Not even a vision from God could untangle all the racial disunity inside of Peter's heart.
Right. Yeah. And Peter was a follower of Jesus. Yeah. And so we recognize that being a follower of Jesus doesn't remove our sin tendencies.
The flesh is still entangling.
Yeah. And so I think what the Bible tells us then in Revelation is that we're going to be, the heaven's going to be full of all these different ethnicities worshiping Jesus together. Every tribe, tongue, and nation is going to be worshiping Jesus together. So we have to get there. Like, we aren't there. The church was largely silent during the civil rights movement. And we have a responsibility to talk about this. We have to be willing to enter into the conversation, and we don't have to take the side of Fox News or CNN. We don't have to take the political side, Republican or Democrat. Like, that's not our responsibility, and that's what's always thrown me off. Yeah. It's like, I don't know what to pick between those two sides.
Yeah, the world says, like, ascribe yourself to this cultural narrative about this thing and join another tribe, right?
But as the church, we have to be willing to ask, what does God say about this? And we have to be willing to say, it might be different than what our parents said about it. Yeah. It might be different than what our favorite news station said about it.
Your political affiliation.
It might actually be different than I've always believed before. And if the Bible says it, then we ought to do it.
That's good.
Was there anything sort of like that jumped off the page to you? I mean, as you studied your Bible or throughout the trip, I guess.
Yeah. I think, honestly, the biggest thing that stands out is, I mean, we talked a lot about what does God say about this, right? And like I've said before, that God delights in justice, right? And that he hates injustice, and that, you know, when he was talking to the Pharisees, I think it was in Luke, gosh, now that I'm blanking on it, but just this idea of, you know, you focus so much on tithing, but you forget about justice and love. And that is what God's heart is about, which is a really good reminder and for us. But the main thing that stood out was just getting to know people and their stories, and how they personally have experienced racism in their own life. Because for me, being so removed from it, it's okay, well, that's something on the news or a thing I hear about, which it's so easy to just be able to be disconnected from people because it's over there, right? And when you
so it was like this trip was like removing the gaps.
Totally.
In those things. Yeah.
Well, even getting to know Brian and his story. I mean, that's one thing that I share a lot with people with the trip, is that when I learned about Brian's story, and part of that was he was taught to hate blonde-haired, blue-eyed white people.
Yeah, Brian King, who was on the trip with us. Yeah,
and that's me.
Who's on staff here?
Yeah, he's on staff.
And I know Brian as someone who deeply loves the Lord and loves people and has a heart for people to come to know Christ. And so to hear that side of his story and just who he was before Christ, and then to be walking through these museums, both of us just crying, right, because of the hate and the evil that we see, and him to look over at me and say, "How are you doing? Are you doing okay? Like, how are you doing, sister?"
Like caring for you,
caring for me. Just that sense of like,
and your thought is like, how are you doing?
Yeah, exactly. Like, how are you doing? Is there
people who look like you?
Yes,
Yeah.
like,
Well, and there's not a person on the trip that wouldn't have said that same story about Brian, which is an amazing thing. I mean, I had the same encounter as we're walking across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Like I'm sitting there just taking all of it in, and he comes up to me, puts his arm around me, and goes, "Hey, man, how are you doing?"
Yeah.
And I thought the exact same thing.
And outside of Jesus, like those relationships probably just don't ever happen.
Yeah, I don't see how they would. I mean, that's what unifies us, right?
So like, I mean, you guys both talked about like sort of moments. We've talked in the podcast about Kairos moments, right?
Yeah.
Where God places you in a situation, a moment, conversation, a person, a reading, something, right? Which changes the trajectory of your thinking, your action, and either who God is, who you are, how the world is. So yeah, let's talk about moments, you know? So tell me about conversations. Tell me about people you talked to, things you saw in these educational portions of the trip, things that kind of shifted perspective for you.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for me, the number one thing, I was sitting on the back of the bus with Derek Perkins, and we're driving past his elementary school, and they were the first family to integrate this school. And a lot of these stories, I don't know about you, Mal, but a lot of these stories like surround kids for me. Yeah. Like it was amazing how like the situations that kids were put in through this on both sides. But we're driving past the school, and he's telling me the story of how his big brother, he was not the oldest of all his siblings, but he had a bigger brother who was like a big brother, like, and he would protect him from all the white kids in the school. And one day his big brother was suspended, and he knew as he walked out of the classroom what that meant is that he had no protection. And he went, and the kids tried to disguise it as football, but they split up the teams, and they gave him all of the little kids, and all of the big kids were on the other team, and they just beat the daylights out of him. Football, right? I mean, that's what they said it was, but it wasn't. And there's other stories of kids, man, that really impacted me. White kids on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, we saw videos of families who would come out, white families, cheering on the police officers as they beat these black people who are just marching. And there's kids there, and they're passing down the lineage of hate to their kids. There was another story of a guy who was getting off of a bus. He was a kid, kindergartner, 6 years old, and he's getting off of a bus to go. He just integrated the school. He was the first black student there, and
not choosing to be there.
No,
himself.
his parents decided this is what we need to do because we have to take these steps forward. And he gets off the bus after school and he gets shot at. A 6-year-old kid by grown men. And you're just going, man, this is real. This happened in my country, like in the place where I grew up. I never would have known it.
Yeah.
How about you, Mal?
Man.
Stories, perspective shifting moments.
Yeah, so I was looking through pictures and videos before this, and something that continues to just jump out is our time at the Equal Justice Initiative Memorial and Museum. They have this outdoor memorial.
The Lynching Museum.
The Lynching Museum.
Or Memorial. Lynching Memorial.
And yeah, so it's a square, and they have these pillars that are 450 pounds each, and there's over 800 of them, and they have numerous names written down on them for the people who were lynched just in that county, right? So there's over 4,000 names in this. And they have to be verified twice, so birth and death certificate. So there's thousands more that they, haven't been able to.
They said as many as 1 million.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So you walk into this space, and the way that they built it was that these pillars are hanging down, and as you walk through it, they're not rising, the floor is dropping. And so you're walking, and all of a sudden as you're walking, you get to a point where now the pillars you're looking up at them. And the idea is that those are hanging bodies who were lynched. And I didn't know that at the time in the museum until I went back and looked at a video of someone explaining it. And that to me just, I've never, obviously still emotional, I've never experienced anything like that, to see just the hatred that people had. You hear the stories of people being lynched because they wanted to go vote.
Or a land grab where they came in and killed the whole family just so they could take their land.
They could take their land. Or a black man looking at a white woman and being accused of talking to her or whatever. And I'm sitting here laughing and talking with Derek, one of the Perkins sons, and eating ice cream. And he's like, 50 years ago, I would have been killed for talking to you and having this conversation.
Yeah. In that very place, huh? In
that very place, right? And so I think just for me, it was processing a lot of how could people be so hateful? Like the evil, right? And thinking if we're all capable of doing that, what does it mean for me to be fighting against injustice and racism in my own heart? Where is that? Obviously, I'm not involved in that sort of hatred, but I can be angry, right, and say, well, where was the church when that was happening? Or who are the Christians who were encouraging that or a part of it, right? Yeah. But then I have to look at my own self and say, well, what am I doing, you know, in that? And so that was just really, really convicting of my soul being grieved over what I experienced and the hatred. But being reminded even by John Perkins that you can be angry, but that's not where you stay, right?
Yeah.
You respond now in love, and but I'm so angry, I really don't want to respond in love, right?
Well, and the powerful part of that conversation was here's this man who got beat within an inch of his life. They didn't know if he was going to live or die. Yeah. And he's going, no, you can do it. Like blonde haired, blue eyed Mallory, you can do this.
I've lived it.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, on so many levels, it was a God thing, right? I mean, Jordan, if you think about this conversation, if those people marching across whatever bridge or whatever city had become violent, then we wouldn't be where we're at today. And I think the interesting thing is I came up with three takeaways. Like as I walked, as a normal pastor, right? Yeah, that's what you were saying.
Very Mike thing.
Yeah. So here's my 3 application points. Yeah. But it really was 3 things. So
do they rhyme?
No, they don't start with the same
letter.
No,
Okay, yeah.
I don't think they do. Not intentionally, if they do. But the first was, this was our Holocaust. Like as a country, like the era of slavery and civil rights, like it didn't get better after they passed after Lincoln freed the slaves. Like it didn't get better. It just got different. Yeah. But this is our Holocaust, and it really did happen, and it's so important for Americans to know the history. I didn't know, growing up in California, I didn't know all the details and all the history. But I think the other thing that I saw is we've made progress. And I know that can elicit like anger from me even saying that from one side, and another side gets elicited. Anger comes out when I say that it was our Holocaust, right? So I know that I'm putting myself out there and saying this, but we've made progress since the 60s. Like we can, it's you can't argue we haven't if you're looking at the world around us. We talked Jack Schiffley, who's also been on our podcast. He shared that one of his great nieces was taking an African-American boy to prom, and that would have never happened back then. Mallory sitting eating ice cream with Derek Perkins, and nobody bothered them. That wouldn't have happened back then. So we've made progress. But the third thing is, I think that's where some people stop. We've made progress. Good. End of discussion. Let's just be satisfied. And I just think there are things we have to do. I don't agree with everyone on what those answers are. People don't agree with me. But let's have that discussion. Let's talk about it, because we still have progress to make when it comes to the ethnic unity conversation here in Fresno and all around our country. We have to have that conversation.
Yeah.
Why? I mean, there'll be people who say that, can't we just move on? Can't we just stop talking about this stuff? And the reason that we all are burdened by this is because we just don't let it go. Why can't we just forget and forgive?
I think there's some truth to that, right? I think we like to just be black and white. We like to be either there's no truth, it's all truth, or no truth. I think there's some truth to that. We do all too often, we say false things because it advances our narrative. And our culture has gotten away from truth mattering in our conversations. And so, when somebody tells me that the best thing to do to solve this problem is to pour money out on black and brown populations, I'm saying that doesn't work. That's not going to work. But that doesn't mean there's no responsibility there. And so we have to start having conversations centered around truth and figuring out what things look like, and stop saying ridiculous things that nobody believes is true. And so I think, as we get to that place, the reason why we can't stop is because there is truth that says that we shouldn't stop. There's truth out there that says things aren't right everywhere. And it doesn't mean, we have the argument of systemic versus not systemic, reparations versus not reparations. I don't think that's the right conversation. I don't think that we have to have that conversation. What I think we have to have is, on an individual level, how do we love people well? So when we see injustice, are we quiet, or do we speak up about it? Are we intentionally coming into relationships with people that don't look like us? Yeah. I think those are the questions. I have some influence on a church, right? But I have zero influence on politics. So why am I getting wrapped up in the political narrative? I just need to love people. I just need to go out of my way to love them as individuals and stop making them a people group. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, and I think too, if we're talking about reconciliation, right? I think for me to be a part of reconciling, I need to be educated, right? Like I do need to learn the history of everything. I do need to be able to grieve and weep over injustice and evil that has happened, but then be able to move forward. And I think some people want to just be like, we don't want to talk about that, right? I think I just think of in my own life and like with my own sin, right? Like I have to confess that and I have to grieve over it. And I think like, gosh, who said it? I don't know what our conversation was, but we were talking about like, I think you were even asking that, like, who are the giants, right, of this? And I think it was John who just said like, we need everyone in every neighborhood, right, to do this. Like we all are those people. And so for me, what I've been processing is that each of us has our own, like we need to have our own journey of, I'm speaking as a white person, right? Like me as a white person, I need to have my own journey of being able to now have the conversation. Like I can't forget what happened because I need to know the history of that, and I need to hear the stories and hear that, because I think something that and I can't remember who told me this, but just hearing their story and then saying, I'm really sorry that happened to you. That's not, that was not okay. Right? Meant so much more and was healing versus being like, did that really happen? Yeah. Right? Or, I don't know if it happened that way, sort of thing. Right?
Yeah, that's your view. Or,
that's your view, or, whatever it is that we come up with.
Yeah. You weep with those who weep, or you mourn with those who mourn. Right?
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know. I didn't go on this trip, but I'm fairly familiar with these conversations you guys are talking about. And man, I think this stuff's important to remember, because I think any intelligent person would know that, like, just because you can explain something doesn't mean it excuses things. But you also can't be ignorant of why things are the way they are.
And also, you can't dig your heels in. Like, we're people who are made to be in progress. Like, and there's so many people who get to be 38 years old and they're like, this is what I believe.
Yeah.
It's never going to change.
Well, and what you guys got to do was sort of like, I mean, the world is built to sort of re-echo our arguments and our beliefs back to us because of, the online presence and all the things that, these platforms make money on feeding you more of your own
dilemma,
opinion.
Right? Yeah.
And so, man, I just think what you were able to do is step out of your own perspective, your own echo chamber, because we all have them. Doesn't matter what version of the argument it is, right? And you were to just hear people's stories and say, like, give me your version of this thing that I thought I knew.
And empathize with them.
And sit with them in their pain. Mourn with those who mourn. Weep with those who weep. And I just think, like, it would be ignorant of me to say that hundreds of years of economic and physical oppression would not affect the culture of a group of people.
Sure.
And so how do we deal with that as people? I don't have all the answers. But I know that it's not simple.
No.
And I think much of the time it's so easy for people to just, because I think that's what political parties do for us, right? Is they give you plug and play answers.
They package it.
Yeah, and say, well, if you're on our side, here's what you can think about these certain things.
Sure.
Which is, I think, I'm not disparaging you from having a political opinion. That's great. But what I would say is, like, and I'm just hearing this from you guys, is let Jesus's worldview shape you first.
Yeah.
And then ask whether or not that plugs in with what the narrative of these things are.
I think you're so right. And I think as Christians, we're called to be peacemakers all
and
over.
Ministers of reconciliation.
Ministers of reconciliation, peacemakers, which means this, Jordan. It means we're like a zipper. We stand in the gap and we pull both sides together.
Okay.
And the problem with standing in the gap is you get punched by both sides. And I think you got to be, if you're a Christian, you got to ask yourself, am I willing to get punched by both sides?
Yeah.
And I think that for the gospel and for loving others, it's worth it. As we try, what if we were a church full of people who are standing in the gap? who were willing to ask the question, like, how do I pull both sides together? How do I unify them? How do I bring them to Christ? How do I love people the way that Jesus would want me to? Like, that's the question. Not because this problem's, look, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but Brian King always tells me, like, this problem is we're never going to be perfect this side of heaven.
Yeah, and justice is not just going to go away because we're aware of it.
Yeah, and so we're doing gospel work, and we're trying to bring people to Jesus, and so the best way to do that is, I mean, the Bible says that people are going to know that we're his disciples by the way that we love each other. That's not just me and Mal because we're white, or me and you because we're white men. Yeah. That's Christians in general.
And that includes the people who you vehemently disagree with.
Yeah.
Talk about Samaritan and Jew. Right. I mean, couldn't be more different.
Well, in reality, I know Mallory and I both were surrounded on this trip by people who vehemently disagreed with where we were coming from. And yet, I think back on this trip fondly for the discussions that we had, because I say both sides, but it's not really different sides. I would say Mallory and I probably have different views as well. We're probably closer aligned than some other people who are on the trip, but we came into it from a perspective of, this is a safe space. Yeah. And let's have open conversations, and let's see what does God say about it. And I think there's just not enough places where that's happening in our culture.
That's good.
Yeah, it was, and I would say too, with that, I think it was really cool to experience that firsthand for me, that I can disagree with people, but like I walk away, and especially the team in Mississippi too, right? If I don't agree with everything that they said, I still love them deeply. Yeah. Like, and I still consider them family. Yeah. Right?
There's only 9 other people that I got to experience that with, like, from our church. And so, like you said, it's special.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it can be done where you can disagree, but you can continue to love one another in Christ and make that the focus versus your differences.
Well, I mean, just to wrap up the conversation, we usually like to, push people in a direction of growth and offer, suggestions. What would you guys say? What would be that sort of next step in the area of growth? For people,
go on this trip.
We are going to do another trip.
It's
we are going to go
Mississippi Unbound by Mallory Mueller.
And we are going to go on another trip. So, I mean, I think if you're interested, sign up for the trip.
Yeah, let's say somebody's not in Fresno.
Yeah,
what do they do? What are some?
Do you have those?
Here, let me make a suggestion to get us going. Maybe make a friend with somebody who you probably wouldn't be friends with.
Sure.
And find some time to hear their story. And remember that you don't have to agree with him on everything.
Yeah.
Be friends with people who aren't like you.
Yeah.
That's okay.
It's good. It's good.
Yeah. Baby steps.
I think I would say stay confused. And I think the most dangerous place we can be is sure in life. Like, I think that and I guess what I mean by that may be clear as mud, but for me, it's just going, like, I've talked to so many people who are sure that they're in the right place. They're 38 years old and they've come to all of their answers on life. Their faith is exactly where it's always going to be. Their worldview is where it's always going to be. They have settled into a place where they're just sure they're right on everything. And I'm just going, that can't be true. Yeah. Like, you're not going to die being right about everything. So just stay curious, stay confused, and just admit that maybe there are things for you, whether you're, listening to this and you're 18, or you're listening to this and you're 80, or anywhere in between. There may be growth areas in your life that you should want to figure out what they are. You should want to experience those things, because God is a God who just calls us to growth, spiritual growth, to live in more wisdom, to have more loving relationships as we grow older. And I think that's found best when you're just asking a ton of questions, and you're never fully
try to understand.
Yeah, and you're never fully sure that your view is right.
And understanding doesn't mean you agree. And
you may not change your views. Yeah. Right? You may not. You may come out of experiences and your views may be the same, but you're only going to have that happen if you don't go into conversations or experiences with an open hand.
Yeah.
How about you, Mel?
Well, like I said, I'm new to all of this, and my thing that I've been processing with the Lord is, God, what's next for me? What is that next baby step? Is it, my circle around me looks very much like me and thinks a lot like me. So like what you said of meeting new people who don't look like me and don't think the same as me, to bring more diversity in my life. That's been kind of my prayer with the Lord is, God, how can my life look more diverse, right? Because that's a full life and that's a rich life, not because I need a token friend of color, right? Or
You're better for it.
I am better knowing people who are different than me, because also that is, like you even said, Mike, like that's what heaven's gonna look like, and so why would that not be what it looks like for me here on this side of heaven? So
experience some heaven now.
Yeah.
Would you recommend a John Perkins book for anybody who's a reader?
Absolutely, all of them.
Anyone to start with?
Yeah, One Blood is great. It's a really good account. And then his
Let Justice Roll Down.
Yeah, Let Justice Roll Down is his kind of his biography, autobiography, I guess, and it was really good as well. Those are the two I would recommend.
Yeah. He has some other ones, but I haven't read them yet.
Yeah. So. Can't recommend them all, but I'm just based on his character, I think they all probably are pretty good.
Probably.
Yeah, I think if you want more sort of like in-depth things, you can always email us and ask for questions. I think I would also recommend Generous Justice by Tim Keller. Yeah, it's a good starting point for people if they want it. So, all right. Well, thanks for sharing your guys' story. It was awesome.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Preach. I feel like you guys are supposed to like high five or something. Or you did it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the WellCast. As always, don't forget to subscribe and tell your friends about us. For more information about the Well Community Church, visit thewellcommunity.org.